I'm Brooke, 28 years old, and last Christmas changed my life forever. Standing in my parents' kitchen during our annual family party, I froze as I overheard my father's words to my mother. Madison is perfect. Sometimes we wish she was our only child. They were talking about my younger sister, the golden child. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, the plate of dessert trembling in my hands as their casual cruelty shattered 28 years of desperate hope. In that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Before I continue this painful story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, what happened next will show you that sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the most important journeys. Growing up in suburban Boston, the contrast between Madison and me was apparent from an early age. Our modest colonial home in Lexington held thousands of memories, most of them highlighting the stark differences between us sisters. Madison, just 2 years younger at 26, had always been the family star, beautiful with her perfect blonde hair and striking blue eyes that matched our mother's, athletically gifted and academically brilliant. She breezed through high school with straight A's while juggling varsity volleyball and student government. I, on the other hand, had always been average. Average height, average brown hair that never quite behaved, average grades that required tremendous effort. I struggled with my weight throughout my teens, and making friends never came easily. While Madison captivated every room she entered, I preferred the quiet corner with a sketchbook. My artistic talents, the one thing I felt confident about. Brooke, why can't you apply yourself like your sister? Became the soundtrack of my adolescence. When I brought home a B+ in calculus after studying for weeks, my mother's response was lukewarm. That's nice, honey. But when Madison aced her chemistry final, my parents took the family out for a celebratory dinner. The pattern continued throughout our lives. My parents attended every single one of Madison's volleyball games, cheering from the stands with handmade signs. But when I had my first art show in high school, they arrived an hour late and left early because Dad had an important call. When I graduated with my design degree, they spent most of the ceremony talking about how Madison had just been accepted to medical school. Despite all this, I never stopped trying. I helped around the house more, thinking maybe acts of service would win their approval. I called regularly after moving out, remembering every birthday and anniversary. I pursued my career in graphic design with determination, landing a job at a respected agency in Boston. I built a decent life for myself, sharing an apartment with a roommate in Cambridge, designing logos and websites for clients who valued my creativity. Madison, meanwhile, sailed through medical school and into her residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. My parents converted our childhood playroom into a dedicated shrine to her accomplishments, trophies, medals, certificates, and newspaper clippings, covering every surface. My few design awards and published works were relegated to a small shelf in the hallway. Your sister works so hard saving lives, my mother would say whenever I mentioned a challenging project at work. Though I suppose making pretty pictures is nice too. The comparison was always there, always pointed, always diminishing. Despite the constant reminders of my secondary status, I maintained hope. Maybe they valued me differently but equally. Maybe they just didn't understand creative careers. Maybe one day they'd see me for who I was and be proud. This desperate optimism sustained me through years of subtle rejections and dismissals. Just before last Christmas, I received incredible news. I'd been promoted to creative director, becoming the youngest person to hold that position in my company's history. With the promotion came a substantial raise and an industry award for a pro bono campaign I'd designed for a local domestic violence shelter. For once, I had something tangible to show my worth. I rehearsed how I'd share the news at our annual family Christmas party, imagining their faces lighting up with pride. Maybe this would be the moment they finally saw me. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a sophisticated emerald green cocktail dress that complemented my brown eyes and the highlights I'd recently added to my hair. I spent extra time on my makeup and even splurged on a professional blowout. This Christmas would be different. This Christmas, I wouldn't be standing in Madison's shadow. This Christmas, they would see me. Little did I know that this party wouldn't bring the validation I'd spent my life chasing. Instead, it would deliver the devastating truth I'd been avoiding for 28 years. The annual Wilson family Christmas party was always an elegant affair. My parents' colonial-style home transformed into a winter wonderland each December, with tasteful decorations, catered food, and approximately 50 guests from our extended family and my parents' social circle. This particular Saturday evening, the house glowed with warmth against the cold Massachusetts night, twinkling lights framing each window and a massive wreath adorning the front door. I arrived early to help set up, carefully placing my neatly wrapped gifts under the 12-foot tree in the living room. My mother was in the kitchen supervising the caterers, looking immaculate as always in her red cocktail dress and pearls. "Brooke, finally. Can you check if the guest bathroom has enough hand towels?" No hello, no comment on my appearance, no thank you for coming early to help. I swallowed my disappointment and did as asked, straightening the monogrammed hand towels that were, of course, already perfectly arranged. As guests began to arrive, I positioned myself near the entrance, eager to share my news with my favorite aunt or my father's more approachable business partners. But every conversation seemed to drift toward the same topic. Madison, her residency program, her volunteer work with Doctors Without Borders, her boyfriend Thomas, who everyone suspected would propose soon. "Have you heard about Madison's research paper being published?" my uncle asked me, not waiting for an answer before continuing. "Your parents must be so proud." I nodded and smiled, the practiced response of a lifetime. When I tried to mention my promotion, he patted my shoulder and wandered off to refill his drink before I could finish my sentence. By the time Madison arrived, fashionably late, in a stunning blue dress that matched her eyes, the party was in full swing. She entered like a celebrity, immediately surrounded by admirers. I watched from the periphery, nursing a glass of wine, and wondering if I should even bother trying to share my news. Then came the moment that changed everything. Madison clinked her glass for attention, her radiant smile captivating the room instantly. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice musical with excitement. Thomas stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "We're engaged!" The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. My mother burst into happy tears, while my father shook Thomas's hand vigorously. "Welcome to the family, son." In the commotion, I plastered on a smile and retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to fetch more champagne for the toast. That's when I heard them. My parents had slipped away from the celebration, unaware of my presence around the corner. "Madison is perfect," my father said, his voice warm with pride. "Sometimes we wish she was our only child." My mother sighed in agreement. "I know what you mean. No drama, no disappointments. Just success after success." "Brooke has always been so ordinary," he continued. "No matter what we did, she never quite measured up. Madison makes parenting easy." "I feel guilty saying it," my mother whispered, "but I've always connected more with Madison. Brooke tries, but she's not Madison," my father finished. The plate of chocolate truffles I'd been gathering trembled in my hands. My ears buzzed as if I'd been struck. 28 years of suspicion, confirmed in one casual conversation. I wasn't imagining the difference in how they treated us. I wasn't being oversensitive. I wasn't enough. I had never been enough. My stomach lurched violently. I couldn't breathe properly. Each inhale shallow and painful. I set down the plate with shaking hands and silently moved away before they could discover me. The bathroom provided temporary sanctuary as I locked the door behind me and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock in my eyes, the color draining from my face. I gripped the marble countertop and tried to steady my breathing. The sounds of celebration continued outside, glasses clinking, laughter, excited chatter about wedding venues and dates. My moment, my achievement, completely forgotten in the wake of Madison's news. And now this, confirmation that my own parents wished I didn't exist. Tears threatened, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to smudge my makeup, and practiced my smile in the mirror until it looked almost convincing. Then I rejoined the party, moving mechanically through the motions of celebration, hugging Madison, admiring her ring, making appropriate noises of excitement. An hour later, when I could bear it no longer, I faked a migraine and made my excuses. No one tried very hard to convince me to stay. My parents barely looked up from the wedding date discussion as I gathered my coat and purse. "Feel better, honey," my mother called absently as I headed for the door. Madison gave me a curious look, but was quickly pulled back into conversation about potential bridesmaids. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, decorated for Christmas with multicolored lights and inflatable Santas, the first tears finally fell. By the time I reached my apartment, they had become great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I collapsed onto my bed fully clothed, mascara streaking down my face, and surrendered to the grief of finally knowing the truth. The drive home from my parents' house that night remains a blur in my memory. Snow had started falling, dusting the roads with a treacherous sheen that matched my emotional state. Several times, my car swerved slightly as tears blurred my vision. In retrospect, I shouldn't have been driving at but all I could think about was escaping putting physical distance between myself and those devastating words. When I finally reached my Cambridge apartment, my roommate Katie was away visiting her family for the holidays. The empty rooms echoed with my footsteps as I moved through them like a ghost, still wearing my emerald party dress, now stained with mascara tears. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The darkness suited my mood. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying my parents' words on an endless loop. Sometimes we wish she was our only child. The casual cruelty of it, the confirmation of my deepest fears. The realization that I had spent my entire life trying to win the approval of people who fundamentally wished I didn't exist. Morning brought no relief. I silenced my phone after the third call from Madison, probably wondering why I'd left the party so abruptly. I couldn't talk to her. Not yet. It wasn't her fault our parents felt this way, but I couldn't bear to hear her voice, so full of excitement about her engagement, while my world collapsed around me. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. Then I did the same the next day, and the next. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a haze of unwashed dishes, takeout containers, and half-empty wine bottles. I moved from my bed to the couch and back again, watching mindless television shows without really seeing them. My phone accumulated missed calls and unread messages. My parents, surprisingly, called once probably to discuss Madison's engagement brunch or some other celebration from which I would feel excluded. Madison called daily, her concern evident in her voicemail messages. I listened to them but couldn't bring myself to respond. "Brooke, it's me again. Are you okay? Please call me back. I'm worried about you." There was genuine concern in her voice, which only made me feel worse. Madison had always been kind to me, never flaunting her favored status. She didn't know how our parents felt. She didn't know what I had heard. How could I tell her? "Hey, congrats on the engagement. By the way, our parents wish you were their only child." The thought was impossible. As the days passed, sadness gave way to something else, a simmering anger that built slowly but steadily. I found myself digging through old photo albums, noting how in family pictures, I was often positioned slightly apart or partially blocked by someone else. I unearthed childhood journals in which my 10-year-old self had written, "Mom went to Madison's science fair today, but couldn't come to my art show because she was tired." Page after page, year after year, the evidence mounted. Birthday parties where Madison received elaborate celebrations while mine were afterthoughts. High school achievements ignored while hers were trumpeted to everyone who would listen. College years where my calls home were brief and perfunctory, while Madison's were put on speaker so everyone could participate. It hadn't been my imagination. It hadn't been normal sibling dynamics. It had been systematic, consistent favoritism that had shaped my entire identity, made me constantly question my worth, and left me perpetually striving for an approval that was never going to come. New Year's Eve arrived, and with it, an invitation to my parents' annual gathering. The text message was casual, as if nothing had happened. Dinner at 7. Thomas's parents will be joining. Business casual attire. No hope you're feeling better or we missed you at Christmas. Just an expectation that I would show up and play my supporting role in the Madison show. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat alone in my apartment while fireworks exploded outside my window, marking the transition to a new year. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. As the clock struck midnight, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to my boss. The words flowed easily. I regret to inform you that I am resigning from my position as creative director, effective 2 weeks from today. My finger hovered over the send button. Was I really going to throw away my career advancement because of one overheard conversation? Was I going to let my parents' words destroy everything I'd worked for? I closed the laptop without sending the email, but the seed had been planted. Something needed to change. I couldn't continue living for my parents' approval, when that approval would never come. I couldn't keep letting their perception define my worth. That night, as the sounds of celebration faded outside my window, I made a silent promise to myself. This year would be different. This year would be mine. New Year's Day dawned crisp and bright, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow and streaming through my apartment windows. The contrast with my dark mood of recent days was stark, almost offensive in its cheerfulness. But as I made my first cup of coffee of the year, something shifted inside me. The warm mug between my hands felt like an anchor to reality after days of floating in a haze of hurt and anger. I declined the family New Year's dinner with a brief text. Not feeling well. Can't make it. The lies were becoming easier. My phone buzzed almost immediately with my mother's response. Madison will be disappointed. Her future in-laws are eager to meet the whole family. Not will miss you or hope you feel better. Just another reminder of my supporting role in the Madison narrative. But today, instead of renewed pain, I felt something different. Clarity, determination, the beginnings of a plan. Later that week, I returned to work, offering vague explanations about a holiday virus. My promotion celebration had been scheduled for Friday afternoon, complete with champagne and an official announcement. I went through the motions, smiling and thanking colleagues, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities and scenarios. The following Tuesday, I sat across from Dr. Helen Winters, a therapist whose name I'd found through my health insurance portal. Her office was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable seating. More importantly, she listened without judgment as I recounted the Christmas party incident and the decades of subtle favoritism that had preceded it. What you're describing sounds like a classic golden child divided by scapegoat dynamic, she explained after I'd finished. It's a common pattern in family systems, but that doesn't make it any less damaging. So I'm not crazy? I'm not just being oversensitive? The validation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Absolutely not. Your feelings are completely valid. The question now is, what do you want to do with this awareness? That question echoed in my mind as I left her office and walked through the Boston winter afternoon. What did I want? For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to consider this question without automatically factoring in my parents' expectations or approval. The answer came to me that evening as I was scrolling through design blogs. An article about the booming tech scene in Seattle caught my attention, featuring several innovative design agencies. On impulse, I updated my portfolio website and submitted applications to 3 of the featured companies. It felt reckless and exhilarating, like jumping off a cliff, not knowing if there was water below. 2 days later, I received an email from Horizon Design Collective, requesting a video interview. The position was Senior Creative Director, a step up from my current role, with a substantially higher salary and creative control over major campaigns. The company culture emphasized work-life balance and creative freedom, values that resonated deeply with me. The interview went remarkably well. The creative team responded enthusiastically to my portfolio, particularly the domestic violence awareness campaign that my parents had barely acknowledged. We connected immediately over shared design philosophies and industry frustrations. By the end of the call, I felt a certainty. I rarely experienced. This was where I belonged. When the offer came through the following week, I accepted without hesitation. The salary was generous enough to afford a comfortable apartment in Seattle without a roommate. The start date gave me 1 month to make arrangements. Everything was falling into place with a speed that felt both terrifying and right. I spent evenings researching Seattle neighborhoods, virtually touring apartments, and making lists of what to take and what to leave behind. During work hours, I meticulously documented my current projects and created transition plans for whoever would inherit them. I operated in a state of focused determination, not allowing myself to dwell on doubts or second thoughts. The only challenge was deciding when and how to tell my family. Madison had announced a small engagement dinner for close family at an upscale Boston restaurant. It seemed as good an opportunity as any we would be in public, which might keep reactions muted, and I could leave if things became too intense. As the dinner approached, I vacillated between anxiety and resolve. One evening, I found myself in a department store, impulsively purchasing a completely new professional wardrobe, sleek, confident pieces in bold colors that the old Brooke would have considered too attention-grabbing. Standing in the fitting room in a striking red blazer that highlighted my brown eyes and newly trimmed hair, I barely recognized myself. The woman in the mirror looked self-assured, determined, ready for a new chapter. The night before the dinner, I sat at my desk with my journal open before me, pen hovering over blank paper. Finally, I began to write. Tomorrow, I tell them. I'm terrified and exhilarated. Part of me still craves their approval, wishes they would beg me to stay. Tell me they're proud of me, that they need me here. But I know better now. My worth doesn't come from their validation. This move isn't about running away. It's about running toward the person I want to be, the life I want to create. For once, I'm choosing myself. Whatever happens tomorrow, this is the right decision. This is my decision. I closed the journal and went to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time since Christmas. Tomorrow would change everything, but I was finally ready. The restaurant my sister had chosen for her engagement dinner was exactly what you'd expect: upscale French cuisine with white tablecloths, soft lighting, and prices that made me wince despite my recent promotion. Le Petit Chateau had always been my parents' favorite special occasion spot, the kind of place where the maitre d' knew them by name and reserved their preferred corner table. I arrived 15 minutes early, my stomach knotted with anticipation. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a tailored black dress that projected confidence, accented with a bold turquoise necklace that drew attention to my face. My hair was styled in loose waves, and my makeup was flawless. If this was to be a defining moment, I wanted to look the part. "Miss Wilson, the rest of your party hasn't arrived yet. Would you like to wait at the bar?" the host asked. "I'll go directly to the table, thank you." I needed those few minutes alone to center myself, to rehearse what I would say. A waiter appeared almost immediately with water and bread, his practiced movements barely registering in my consciousness as I mentally reviewed my prepared speech. I decided to wait until after the main course to make my announcement. No need to overshadow Madison's moment entirely. My parents arrived first, my father helping my mother with her coat in a gesture of practiced chivalry. They spotted me and approached, exchanging the obligatory kisses on cheeks. "You're looking well," my mother said, her tone suggesting mild surprise. "That color suits you." "Thank you," I replied, the familiar desire to please her flickering briefly before I extinguished it. "How have you both been?" "Busy with wedding preparations," my father said, settling into his chair. "Madison and Thomas are thinking June at the Bellingham Country Club. Your mother's already spoken with their events coordinator." Of course they had. Madison and Thomas weren't even at the table yet, and the planning was already in full swing. I nodded and sipped my water, conserving my energy for the conversation to come. Madison and Thomas arrived moments later, both glowing with the special radiance of the newly engaged. Madison looked stunning as always in a pale pink dress that complemented her blonde hair and fair skin. Thomas, tall and distinguished with his professor's bearing, held her hand as if it were made of delicate crystal. "Brooke!" Madison embraced me warmly. "I've been so worried about you. You haven't returned my calls. Sorry about that, I said, the guilt genuine. Madison had always been kind to me, never flaunting her favored status. I've had a lot going on. Well, I'm just glad you're here now, she said, sliding into the seat beside me. I have so much to tell you about the wedding plans. I was hoping you'd help with the design elements, invitations, programs, that sort of thing. No one has your eye for detail. I smiled noncommittally as the waiter arrived to take drink orders. My father ordered an expensive bottle of champagne to celebrate, and conversation turned predictably to wedding venues, guest lists, and potential honeymoon destinations. I participated minimally, offering appropriate responses when directly addressed, but otherwise observing the familiar family dynamic from my new perspective. My mother dominated the conversation, already having researched florists and photographers. My father focused on practical matters like budgets and accommodations for out-of-town guests. Madison alternated between excited descriptions of her dress search and deferring to our parents' suggestions. Thomas contributed occasionally, clearly attempting to include me with questions about my work and life, which my parents smoothly redirected to wedding-related topics. By the time our entrees arrived, I had barely spoken 10 sentences. The familiar invisibility settled over me like an old coat, uncomfortable but well-worn. But this time, instead of resignation, I felt a growing determination. This would be the last family dinner where I disappeared into the background of the Madison show. As the waiter cleared our plates, and my father ordered coffee and dessert, I straightened in my chair and cleared my throat. I have some news to share as well, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of interest. I've accepted a new position, Senior Creative Director at Horizon Design Collective. That's wonderful, honey, my mother said with the automatic response she'd perfected for my achievements. Madison, have you decided on your bridal party yet? Mom, I said more firmly, there's more. Horizon is in Seattle. I'm moving across the country in 3 weeks. The silence that followed was absolute. Madison's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Thomas looked uncomfortable, sensing the sudden tension. My father set down his wine glass with deliberate care. You're what? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm moving to Seattle. It's an incredible opportunity. Higher salary, more creative control, major clients. I've already signed the contract and found an apartment in Capitol Hill. This is very sudden, my mother said, her brow furrowed. Why wouldn't you discuss something like this with us first? Because it's my decision to make, I replied simply. I'm 28 years old. I don't need parental permission to advance my career. It seems rather impulsive, my father said dismissively. Running away to the other side of the country. What about your responsibilities here? Your sister's wedding? There it was, the immediate pivot to how my choices would impact Madison. So predictable, it would have been comical if it weren't so painful. I'm not running away, I said, though part of me recognized the partial truth in his accusation. I'm running towards something better, and I'll fly back for the wedding, of course. Brooke, you can't possibly handle all the pre-wedding events from across the country, my mother interjected. There are showers to plan, fittings to attend. And how will you manage the design elements Madison was counting on you for? I can work remotely, I said, my patience wearing thin. It's 2023, Mom. We have technology for this exact purpose. I think it's great, Madison said suddenly, surprising everyone. Brooke deserves this opportunity. We can make it work for the wedding stuff. She reached over to squeeze my hand. I'm proud of you. Her unexpected support made my eyes sting with tears. It also seemed to inflame my father further. This is completely selfish, he declared, his voice rising enough to attract glances from nearby tables. You've always been like this, Brooke, acting without consideration for how your choices affect this family. First, that art school phase, then refusing the position at my friend's marketing firm, and now this abandoning your sister during her engagement to move thousands of miles away. It's childish and irresponsible. The familiar shame began to rise in me, the feeling that I had once again failed to meet expectations, disappointed everyone. But this time, anger rose faster, burning away the shame like morning sun dispelling fog. Selfish? I repeated, my voice low but intense. That's interesting coming from you, Dad. Tell me, when have either of you ever considered how your choices affected me? My mother's face paled. What are you talking about? I'm talking about a lifetime of being second best, of having my achievements ignored while Madison's were celebrated, of being an afterthought in my own family. That's ridiculous, my father scoffed. We've always treated you both equally. The laugh that escaped me held no humor. Really? Then why did I overhear you at the Christmas party, saying you wished Madison was your only child? The table went completely silent. Madison gasped audibly. Thomas studied his water glass, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. My parents exchanged a panicked look. You misunderstood, my mother finally said, her voice trembling slightly. We would never say such a thing. I heard you clearly, I insisted, years of suppressed hurt flowing freely now. In the kitchen, while everyone was celebrating Madison's engagement, Dad said, Madison is perfect. Sometimes we wish she was our only child. And you agreed, Mom. You said I was a disappointment. That's not what we meant, my father attempted, his authoritative tone failing him. You're taking things out of context. What possible context would make that acceptable? I demanded. Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up knowing you're the lesser child? To constantly strive for approval that never comes? To have your own parents wish you didn't exist? Tears threatened, but I blinked them back fiercely. I would not cry. Not now. I don't need your approval anymore, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I don't need your permission. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your love, and I'm done. I deserve better than to be the family disappointment. I deserve to be somewhere I'm valued for who I am, not constantly measured against Madison and found wanting. I stood, gathering my purse and coat. I'm going to Seattle. I'm going to build a life I love, surrounded by people who actually see me. And for the first time, I don't care if you're proud of me or not. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the restaurant, my legs surprisingly steady given the earthquake of emotions inside me. The cold January air hit my face as I stepped outside, crisp and clarifying. Brooke! Wait! Madison's voice called behind me. I turned to see her hurrying out of the restaurant, coat hastily thrown over her shoulders. I'm so sorry, she said when she reached me, her eyes wide with distress. I had no idea they said that. No idea they felt that way. It's not your fault, I said, meaning it. You've never been anything but kind to me. But I should have noticed. I should have said something all these years. I shook my head. It wouldn't have changed anything. This isn't about you, Madison. It never was. It's about them. And more importantly, it's about me finally standing up for myself. Are you really moving to Seattle? She asked, a hint of sadness in her voice. Yes. It's the right decision for me. She nodded slowly. I'll miss you, but I understand. She hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I've always admired you. Your creativity, your independence, the way you forge your own path instead of following everyone's expectations like I do. Her words surprised me. You admire me? But you're the perfect one. Madison laughed, a touch of bitterness in the sound. Perfect according to their narrow definition. Do you know how exhausting that is? How terrified I am of disappointing them. At least you've always been true to yourself. We looked at each other with new understanding. Two sisters seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. I'll come back for your wedding, I promised. And we'll figure out the invitations and everything else. This doesn't change us. I know, she said, hugging me tightly. Call me when you get home tonight, okay? And actually answer when I call you in Seattle. I nodded, returning her embrace before pulling away. As I walked toward the parking lot, I felt lighter than I had in years. The confrontation I had feared had happened, and I had survived. More than survived, I had finally spoken my truth. Whatever came next, I would face it on my terms. No more seeking approval that would never come. No more living in Madison's shadow. For once, I was choosing myself, and it felt like freedom. Moving day arrived with surprising swiftness. 3 weeks had passed in a blur of logistics, breaking my lease, shipping belongings, finalizing employment paperwork, and saying goodbyes to the few close friends I had in Boston. My parents had made no attempt to contact me after the restaurant confrontation, their silence speaking volumes. Madison, however, called daily, our conversations deeper and more honest than they had ever been. "Are you nervous?" she asked during our final call before my flight. "Terrified and exhilarated," I admitted, surveying my nearly empty apartment. "But it feels right." "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "I wish I had your courage." Those words sustained me through the 6-hour flight to Seattle, as I watched the familiar East Coast landscape disappear beneath clouds and eventually give way to the dramatic mountains and waterways of the Pacific Northwest. Looking down at the Emerald City as we descended, I felt a curious sense of homecoming to a place I'd never been. My new apartment in Capitol Hill exceeded the virtual tour's promise. The one-bedroom unit featured high ceilings, large windows overlooking a tree-lined street, and a small balcony perfect for morning coffee. The building had character, a converted 1,922 apartment house, with original hardwood floors and crown molding, but updated with modern amenities. It cost more than I'd ever paid for housing, but my new salary made it comfortably affordable. That first night, surrounded by boxes and basic furniture hastily ordered online, I stood at my balcony door watching Seattle's lights shimmer against a backdrop of mountains and water. The air smelled different here, evergreen and ocean salt, instead of Boston's urban density. Everything felt new, uncharted, full of possibility. Horizon Design Collective occupied the top 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in the vibrant Pioneer Square district. My first day began with a tour from Eliza, the HR director whose warm emails had guided me through the onboarding process. "We're thrilled to have you join us, Brooke," she said, as she led me through the open concept workspace, filled with natural light and creative energy. "Your domestic violence awareness campaign was a major factor in our decision to recruit you. That kind of meaningful work is exactly what Horizon stands for." The validation I'd sought from my parents for years was delivered so casually by this stranger that I nearly stumbled. "Thank you," I managed. "That project meant a lot to me." My team's 6 designers and 2 copywriters who would report directly to me welcomed me with genuine enthusiasm. They had prepared a breakfast spread of local pastries and coffee from the artisanal cafe downstairs. No awkward formality, no tentative politeness, just creative professionals eager to collaborate. "We've all studied your portfolio," said Zach, a graphic designer with vibrant blue hair and sleeve tattoos. "Your minimalist approach to the Firelight Foundation campaign was brilliant. The way you communicated complex trauma with such simple visual elements, I've been trying to learn from that." By lunchtime, I had been included in 3 passionate design debates, shown dozens of works in progress, and asked for my opinion more times than I could count. By day's end, I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized in a way I'd never experienced in my Boston position. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to my life. Weekdays were filled with creative challenges at Horizon, where I found myself thriving in the collaborative environment that valued innovation over hierarchy. Evenings and weekends became opportunities for exploration, discovering my neighborhood's eclectic restaurants, hiking nearby trails, visiting museums and galleries, gradually making Seattle mine. My apartment transformed from an empty shell to a true reflection of myself. I painted one wall a deep teal that would have horrified my mother's conservative taste. I hung original artwork from local artists rather than the safe, generic prints that had decorated my Boston apartment. I bought furniture based solely on what I loved, rather than what would impress others. Every choice felt like reclaiming another piece of my identity. My parents' attempts to contact me began about 3 weeks after my arrival. First came carefully worded texts, "Hope you're settling in well, and your mother wonders if you've found a good doctor there." Then calls that I let go to voicemail, their messages becoming increasingly strained as I maintained my silence. I wasn't ready to speak with them yet. The wound was still too fresh, the newfound independence too fragile. Madison visited in April, ostensibly to discuss wedding details, but really, we both knew, to see my new life for herself. I watched her take in my apartment, my neighborhood, my transformed appearance. I'd cut my hair into a stylish bob and adopted a wardrobe that favored bold colors and interesting textures over the safe, forgettable styles I'd worn in Boston. "You seem different," she observed as we shared wood-fired pizza at my favorite local restaurant. "Happier, more, you." "I am," I confirmed. "For the first time, I'm making choices based on what I want, not what I think will finally earn Mom and Dad's approval." "I envy that," she admitted, twisting her engagement ring. "Sometimes I wonder how many of my choices have actually been mine." We spent the weekend having conversations we should have had years ago about the unspoken competition our parents had created between us, about how it had shaped both our relationship and our individual development. I learned that Madison had felt trapped by their expectations as much as I had felt excluded by them. The golden child cage was as confining as my invisible one, just lined with prettier materials. By the time she left, something fundamental had shifted between us. We were no longer the roles we'd been assigned, golden child and disappointment, but simply sisters discovering genuine connection. My first major project at Horizon launched in May, a rebranding campaign for a local nonprofit that provided educational opportunities for underprivileged youth. The work was challenging, meaningful, and appreciated. When the client actually teared up during the presentation, overwhelmed by how perfectly we'd captured their mission, I felt a professional satisfaction deeper than anything I'd experienced in Boston. "This is why I hired you," Julian, Horizon's founder, told me afterward. "You have an exceptional ability to find the emotional core of a message and translate it visually. We're lucky to have you." I saved his words in a special folder in my email, a reminder on difficult days that I was valued here, that my work mattered. The collection grew as clients and colleagues offered similar praise. Slowly, these external validations helped me build something I'd never possessed, an internal sense of worth that didn't depend on parental approval. Summer brought my parents' inevitable visit. Madison had arranged it, acting as mediator between us since my move. "They're trying, Brooke," she'd pleaded. "They may never be perfect, but they're making an effort. At least give them a chance." I agreed reluctantly, setting boundaries in advance. They would stay at a hotel, not with me, and our time together would be limited to specific outings. I wouldn't subject my newly constructed life to their judgment 24/7. Their arrival was awkward, our interactions strained by months of minimal contact, and the unresolved conversation at the restaurant. My mother commented on my hair. "It's certainly different," while my father made superficial observations about Seattle's traffic and coffee culture. We navigated safe topics like Madison's wedding preparations and my father's golf game. On their second day, I gave them a tour of Horizon's offices. I hadn't planned to, but Julian insisted when I mentioned their visit. "Bring them by," he said. "We'll show them what their daughter is accomplishing out here." Watching my parents take in the impressive space, meet my colleagues who spoke so highly of me, and see the prominent display of the youth education campaign that had earned industry recognition, I realized I no longer needed their approval, but part of me still wanted them to see that others valued what they had dismissed. The real breakthrough came during dinner that evening, when my father awkwardly cleared his throat after our entrees arrived. "Your mother and I have been doing some thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "and some talking with a family therapist at Madison's insistence." I glanced at my sister, who gave me an encouraging nod. "We haven't been fair to you, Brooke," he continued. "We had certain expectations, certain ideas about success, and we failed to recognize that your path, while different from what we envisioned, is valid and worthy of respect." My mother reached across the table to touch my hand. "We're trying to understand. We don't want to lose you." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase years of favoritism or heal all wounds. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of their rigid expectations. For now, it was enough to start building a new, more honest relationship, one based on who we actually were rather than who they had wanted me to be. As summer turned to fall, Seattle revealed new charms, leaves turning brilliant colors against gray skies, cozy coffee shops offering shelter from the increasing rain, the peaceful beauty of Puget Sound on misty mornings. I began dating Jason, a software engineer I'd met through a cooking class. whose quiet confidence and genuine interest in my thoughts was refreshingly different from previous relationships where I'd often felt overshadowed. My first holiday season away from Boston brought the freedom to create my own traditions. I hosted a Friendsgiving for colleagues who couldn't travel home, decorated my apartment with ornaments chosen for beauty rather than family obligation, and spent Christmas Day volunteering at a local shelter before video calling with Madison and briefly with my parents. As the year anniversary of my overheard conversation approached, I realized how profoundly that painful moment had changed my life's trajectory. The hurt remained, a scar rather than an open wound, but alongside it had grown something unexpected: gratitude for the clarity it had provided, for the courage it had forced me to find, and for the authentic life it had ultimately led me to create. 1 year after the Christmas party that changed everything, I found myself driving a rental car through familiar Boston neighborhoods, watching snow fall gently on streets I once called home. The city felt simultaneously intimate and foreign, like reading a book you loved in childhood and finding it both familiar and strangely different through adult eyes. I had returned for Madison's wedding, scheduled for the weekend before Christmas, a full-circle moment that wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I'd been desperately seeking parental approval, living in the shadow of my sister's achievements. Now I returned as someone else, entirely confident in my career, comfortable in my skin, no longer defined by my parents' perception. My parents' house looked exactly as it always had during the holidays, meticulously decorated with tasteful wreaths and white lights, the massive Christmas tree visible through the front window. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I rang the doorbell instead of using my old key, a small but significant acknowledgement that I was now a visitor rather than a resident. My mother opened the door, her expression a complex mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Brooke, you're here." She hesitated briefly before embracing me. The hug felt different, less perfunctory, more genuine. "The flight was okay?" "No problems," I confirmed, stepping into the foyer and noting how much smaller it seemed than in my memory. "Seattle to Boston is pretty straightforward." My father appeared from his study, greeting me with an awkward combination of handshake and half-hug that somehow perfectly encapsulated our evolving relationship, formal but trying for warmth. "You look well," he offered, and I could tell he meant it as more than a social pleasantry. "Thanks, Dad. I am well." The conversation that followed over dinner was stilted at times, but punctuated by moments of genuine connection. They asked questions about Seattle, my work at Horizon, my new friends, and notably, they actually listened to my answers. I showed them photos of my apartment, my team at work, the spectacular views from my favorite hiking spots. They shared updates about neighbors, family, friends, local developments. We carefully navigated around the deeper issues, the emotional landmines that still lay between us. This wasn't the time for excavating old wounds or demanding accountability for past hurts. That would come later, gradually, as we rebuilt a relationship based on who we were now rather than the roles we'd previously occupied. Madison arrived the following day with Thomas, her energy filling the house as it always had. But our reunion felt different, warmer, more equal. She pulled me aside almost immediately, dragging me upstairs to her old bedroom where her wedding dress hung on the closet door. "I can't believe it's happening in 3 days," she said, her excitement palpable. "I'm so glad you're here early to help me stay sane through the final preparations." "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," I replied honestly. Our weekly video calls over the past year had transformed our relationship, but being together in person cemented the change. The days leading up to the wedding were chaotic in the way only family events can be: last-minute adjustments, minor crises averted, relatives arriving from out of town. I found myself watching my parents interact with extended family, noting how they introduced me now. "Brooke is a senior creative director at Horizon in Seattle," my father told his brother with noticeable pride. "They're doing groundbreaking work in the nonprofit sector." "She designed all our wedding stationery," Madison added, showing off the invitation suite I'd created, combining elegant typography with hand-painted watercolor elements. "Isn't it gorgeous? She's so talented." Each of these small moments felt like stepping stones across a river, not yet the solid ground of complete healing, but movement in the right direction. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for the winter wonderland theme Madison had chosen. As maid of honor, I spent the morning helping her prepare, our mother fluttering around us with a combination of joy and barely contained anxiety. "You've always been her rock," my mother said quietly while Madison was being photographed. "Even when you two were small. She looks confident, but she needs your steadiness." The observation surprised me, not just its accuracy, but the fact that my mother had seen and appreciated this aspect of our relationship. "I think we balance each other," I replied carefully. "Always have." The ceremony was beautiful, the reception joyful. I gave my maid of honor speech without once mentioning our parents' favoritism or my years of feeling secondary, not out of avoidance, but because those weren't the defining elements of my relationship with Madison anymore. Instead, I spoke about her compassion, her determination, her ability to light up a room. I spoke about our renewed sisterhood, stronger now in its authenticity than it had ever been in its mandated closeness. During the reception, while Madison and Thomas performed their first dance, I found myself standing between my parents, all three of us watching with genuine happiness. "You've both done a wonderful job," commented an elderly great-aunt. "Such accomplished daughters. You must be very proud." "We are," my father said, and something in his tone made me glance at him. He was looking not at Madison, the bride, but at me, of both our daughters. Later that evening, Madison found me taking a moment of quiet on the venue's heated patio, watching snowflakes drift past the clear tent walls. "Best wedding ever," she declared, dropping into the chair beside me and kicking off her heels with a sigh of relief. "Though I may be biased." I laughed, just slightly, but it really was beautiful. She studied me for a moment. "You're different now, in a good way." "Seattle will do that to a person," I joked. "It's not just Seattle." She took my hand. "You know what's ironic? I always envied you." "Me? Why would you possibly envy me?" "Your freedom, your creativity, the way you see the world differently from anyone else I know." She shook her head. "While you were envying my relationship with Mom and Dad, I was envying your ability to be yourself." "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" I squeezed her hand. "For what it's worth, I think we're both doing okay now." "More than okay," she agreed. "But I want you to know something. Even when things were at their worst with Mom and Dad, even when you felt invisible, I always saw you, Brooke. I always thought you were amazing." Those words, spoken with such sincerity on her wedding day, when she could have been focused entirely on herself, meant more than any parental approval ever could. The remainder of my Boston visit passed in a blur of holiday preparations and family gatherings. I maintained my boundaries, staying at a hotel rather than my childhood bedroom, taking time for myself when family interactions became overwhelming, speaking my truth calmly when old patterns threatened to reemerge. On Christmas Eve, my mother asked me to help her in the kitchen while everyone else watched holiday movies in the living room. As we worked side by side preparing traditional family recipes, she spoke hesitantly. "I know we have a long way to go, Brooke. Your father and we made serious mistakes. We're trying to understand why we treated you differently, why we couldn't see how special you are in your own right." I continued chopping vegetables, giving her space to continue. "The therapist says we projected our own insecurities onto you, valued certain achievements because they were the ones we understood." She paused. "That doesn't excuse it, but I hope it helps you understand that it was never about you not being enough. It was about our limitations." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest, and honesty was the foundation we needed to build upon. "I appreciate that, Mom," I said finally. "I'm not looking for perfection, just growth, for all of us." When I flew back to Seattle after the new year, I carried with me a different kind of baggage than when I'd left Boston a year before, not the weight of inadequacy and invisible wounds, but the lighter, more complex burden of a family in transition, relationships being rebuilt on healthier foundations, love that was learning to see more clearly and accept more fully. My apartment welcomed me back with its teal wall and eclectic furniture, its large windows now displaying Seattle's moody winter skies. Jason had watered my plants, and left flowers on the counter, with a sweet note welcoming me home. Home. The word had taken on new meaning this past year. In my first therapy session after returning, Dr. Winters asked how I felt about the visit. Surprisingly okay, I answered after consideration. There were difficult moments, old patterns that tried to reassert themselves. But I maintained my boundaries. I spoke my truth, and they actually listened. That's significant progress, she observed. For all of you, the most important thing I realized, I continued, is that I don't need their validation anymore. I value our relationship and want it to heal, but my sense of self-worth no longer depends on their approval. That evening, I video called Madison, who was honeymooning in Italy. "How's Seattle?" she asked, the Mediterranean sunshine forming a halo behind her. "Rainy and perfect," I replied. "How's married life?" "Surprisingly unchanged, since we lived together for 2 years already." She laughed. "But I do enjoy saying, 'my husband.'" We chatted about her honeymoon adventures and my readjustment to work. Before signing off, she grew serious. "I've been thinking about what you said last year, about living authentically. I've made a decision. I'm cutting back my hospital hours to teach part-time at the medical school. It's what I've always wanted, but I was afraid of disappointing Mom and Dad." "Are you kidding? They'll be thrilled you're a professor. It's the perfect combination of prestige and helping others." "Probably," she acknowledged with a rueful smile. "But the point is, I'm doing it because it's what I want, not because of how they'll react." "I'm proud of you, Maddie. Learn from the best," she replied. "Love you, sis." As I ended the call and looked out at the Seattle skyline, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey from that devastating moment at the Christmas party to now had been difficult, painful at times, but ultimately transformative. Sometimes, the deepest wounds lead to the most important healing. Sometimes, the most painful truths create the opportunity for the most authentic growth. And sometimes, finding yourself requires leaving behind everything you thought you wanted. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family expectations and your own happiness? Have you found that painful experiences eventually led to personal growth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of personal transformation, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's ability to see it.